The streets of Daiyu City reeked of desperation and the acrid smell of never-washed duricrete, embedded in thick layers of soot and acidic rain. The air itself was rancidly thick. As you wade through the streets, aside from the occasional pleasant smell of exotic meats and spices cooking, you're occasionally hit by a wall of sweat and breath from 1,000 different species that called the city home. Here, wretched criminal scum lived alongside refugees from a war that had ended more than a decade ago, the Clone Wars. Another common smell in the streets of Daiyu City was Imperial Plastoid, a reminder of the broken promises made by Emperor Palpatine after the war finished. He had promised that things would return back to normal once peace and stability was restored. Obi Wan Kenobi fit in well with all of the other broken toys that wandered the streets. These other former professionals had also plied their trade in the Galactic Republic's more diverse free market. But now everyone and everything had been replaced by the all-encompassing might and weight, the Imperial military complex. There was no other work or purpose, even for former members of the Republic military. As Kenobi walked through the city streets, he encountered a familiar face and voice, sitting in the shadows on the ground, asking for spare credits. Upon closer inspection, the man could have been Commander Cody, the clone that Obi Wan Kenobi had worked the most with during the war. But then again, no, Commander Cody would have never let himself grow such a scruffy beard. Plus, beneath the cloak, the wretched man was wearing Phase 2 armor with blue trim. This individual was a member of the 501st Legion, the proud and decorated unit that Obi Wan Kenobi had fought alongside many times during the Clone Wars. Their leader was none other than his own former apprentice, Anakin Skywalker. Obi Wan Kenobi had bled for the 501st, and the 501st had fought for him. But they were also the Clone Legion sent to pacify the Jedi Temple during Order 66. Obi Wan Kenobi had seen the hollow recordings of their assault, their murder of his friends and colleagues, and the execution of younglings. Days after, Obi Wan Kenobi and Yoda would actually assault the Jedi Temple themselves in order to find out more information about what was going on. It was here that Obi Wan Kenobi would have to go up against the 501st face to face. The Master Jedi could have just walked away from the clone and given him nothing. He could have even attacked him. After all, it was men with his face who wiped out everything he loved and cared about. But Obi Wan Kenobi was far too wise and intelligent. He'd lived through too many terrifying experiences, and with that came a mindset full of compassion. For the clones were not all that different from the Jedi. Both organizations were made up of men pressed into service without a choice. The Jedi were taken from birth to serve the light side, and the clones were born to serve the Republic. And now, just like the Jedi, the clones were tossed aside when they were no longer needed. When Order 66 hit, 99.99999% of the inhibitor chips inserted into the clone troopers prior to their birth were functional. You did have rare cases of malfunctioning chips, like with what happened with Clone Trooper Tuck in the last year of the Clone Wars. His inhibitor chip had kicked off early, and it resulted in him murdering his Jedi General. Now, these chips had programmed a specific set of behaviors that the clones would practice repeatedly through nightmares their entire lives. This dream was thought to be some type of weird side effect from the cloning process, or perhaps some type of shared trauma they all experienced from combat. But the reality was, it was cleverly hidden programming that would turn the clones against the Jedi in the blink of an eye. Even the most stoic and loyal clones like Captain Rex couldn't overcome the chip inside of his head, and he almost guns down his good friend and commander, Ahsoka Tano, as a result. And he was one of the lucky ones because he had developed close ties to the Jedi. Ahsoka would remove the chip from Rex's brain and help him regain control of himself. A handful of other clones, like Republic Commando Gregor and Clone Commander Wolf, would also remove their chips and win their freedom, as would the members of the Bad Batch unit. But for the most part, the inhibitor chip program was ridiculously successful. Now, clone troopers were widely considered some of the best infantry soldiers in galactic history. This was because they were trained from birth to fight and extremely loyal. But there were two main issues with the clone troopers. First, it took way too long to train a clone trooper, up to 9 years, and that was with the accelerated aging process. Your average soldier during the Imperial era only really needed a year of training to be combat ready, sometimes less than a year. Admiral Wilhuff Tarkin had actually created Project War Mantle with the sole purpose of finding a cheaper alternative to the manpower crisis the Imperial military was facing. It was also said that Darth Sidious was ironically paranoid about the clones being used against him in the way he used them to destroy the Jedi. In order to alleviate suspicion in case anyone finds Order 66, there were several other orders also programmed into these clones' heads through the inhibitor chips. A lot of these orders actually dealt with removing the head of the Republic government or removing the head of the individual who was the head of the Republic government. During the Clone Wars, the populist political organization known as the Commission for the Protection of the Republic, or COMPOR, would portray the clone troopers as the heroic boys in white. Posters and propaganda films were made of these troopers' heroic sacrifices on battlefield. The Republic media drummed up so much fear amongst the populace about a potential separatist droid invasion into their home territory that many citizens of the Republic held the clones in very high regard, and that viewpoint would carry on over to the Imperial era as well. In the latter years of the war, the clones actually replaced the Jedi as the main defenders of the Republic, at least in the public's view. This was all done, of course, in preparation for Order 66. But the reality that the clones actually faced was far more grim. Despite having a lot of popular support, the clones technically had no rights. Clone troopers weren't technically citizens of the Republic. They didn't have representation in the Senate, either through their homeworld of Kamino or as members of the armed services. Officially speaking, they were actually the property of the Kaminoan cloners, and essentially lifelong conscripts who had no other choice than to fight in the clone army. We've seen that deserters like Sergeant Slick or Cut LaQuain were in severe violation of the clone army's code of conduct and could be punished greatly if they were caught. You'd expect more clones to actually desert the Grand Army of the Republic, or at least for more clones to understand what their situation actually was and protest and demand change from the GIR higher-ups. But these clones were indoctrinated and genetically altered to be extremely loyal to the Republic. They were also isolated from the wider galaxy, especially in the earlier years of the war, and all they essentially had and knew was their service to the Republic and to each other. But towards the end of the war, things were beginning to sour, even amongst the clone troopers' ranks. First, you just had this general discontent about the course the galaxy was taking. There were widespread anti-war protests amongst the civilian populace. And the separatist propaganda was finally reaching Republic space, and they rightly pointed out that these clone troopers were essentially slaves bred for combat, and they had the emotional and mental intelligence of teenagers, which was kind of messed up. We also saw that compared to the first few generations of clones, the latter batches of clones had far less individual personality and were generally more loyal to Emperor Palpatine than to the Republic itself. This reflected Palpatine's growing power. It also seems like individuals with inhibitor chips in their heads became more docile once Order 66 was carried out. Soon after the war, the clone facilities on Kamino were shut down and the last batch of clones were trained. The Empire would eventually take over all operations on the planet and would destroy Daiyu City from orbit with Star Destroyers. Order 66 for many clone troopers would be the last battle they would participate in on behalf of the federal government. Emperor Palpatine had already decided on transitioning the military towards Admiral Rampart and Wilhuff Tarkin's War Mantle project. Instead of using costly clones that took a very long time to train, the Empire would tap into its massive civilian population and build an army out of them instead. We have to remember that the Clone Wars was an incredibly devastating conflict, and it destroyed wide swaths of the Outer Rim and also the Mid-Rim. And so you essentially had, billions of refugees all across the galaxy looking for job and work, and the Imperial military took advantage of that. But for the time being, the clones, especially the newer units that were more obedient and docile, would serve as the first generation of Imperial stormtroopers. They would help the Empire eradicate the remaining separatist holdouts. They would even report older clones who were still loyal to the Republic and the Jedi to their new Imperial masters. Other units would seize the Jedi Temple's various assets across the galaxy. Republic commando units, who had carried out dangerous raids behind enemy lines during the Clone Wars and were involved in foreign internal defense, would use their skills to train their first waves of civilian soldiers during the Empire. Other individuals like Clone Commando Cody would also serve as a trainer for future stormtroopers. Most clones were well aware that they were slowly getting replaced by these stormtroopers and they didn't really have a future in the Empire, yet their programming didn't really allow them to protest. At the same time, clones who were really worried about losing their job in the military would seek other opportunities within the Imperial hierarchy. Yet at the same time, the Empire was weeding out the clones that they felt were becoming way too old and slow to continue fighting in their military force. Some clones proved to be quite hardy though, and would continue serving even during the Galactic Civil War period. One of Palpatine's royal guards was actually an old clone trooper. During the search for R2-D2 on Tatooine, one of the stormtroopers sent to Mos Eisley was also a clone trooper vet. What happened to the rest of the clones isn't completely clear, but some definitely fell on rough times, like the clone we see in the Kenobi TV series, who 10 years after the Clone Wars was living on the streets of Daiyu City. This was to be expected though. Years after the war ended, more and more clones were experiencing mental and emotional issues caused not only by the war, but by their lack of identity outside of military service. By removing this foundation from their lives, many clones would become aimless and would have a very hard time adjusting to regular society. A lot of them also didn't have the skills to work normal jobs. In the novel New Dawn, we actually hear about a housing complex called the Crispus Commons. It was apparently an Imperial military housing project designed specifically for homeless Clone War veterans, but it ultimately didn't receive enough funding and was kind of left in a state of disrepair. So even though many clones were discharged from military service, there was clearly no real safety net for them at all. Once again, we see how important having representation and a voice in the media is. Even the clones who stayed within the Imperial military had their complaints. For one, the rank and file stormtroopers were far less competent than the highly modified and trained clone troopers that the clones were used to fighting alongside. Most clones would eventually adjust to their new reality, but many of them fantasized about fighting alongside their clone brothers once again. And just as the clones were perfect soldiers for the Republic because of their steadfast loyalty and tendency to not question orders, this also made them the ideal stormtroopers as well. There's a reason why most Star Wars fans have almost zero hate towards the clone troopers, despite carrying out Order 66 and murdering a bunch of Jedis and, Jedi younglings. And that's because we all feel for the clones. They really never had any choice in the matter. They were born as slaves for a war that they truly didn't understand. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,